It's my privilege to introduce our speaker for this Missions and Evangelism Lectureship. Mr. David Brickner leads a worldwide Jewish evangelism agency called Jews for Jesus, with branches in 13 countries, including Israel. Jews for Jesus is known for its forthright evangelistic approach in major Jewish population centers around the world. A Jewish believer in Jesus himself, David has been in ministry for over 30 years and has appeared many times on secular television and radio programs to make the case for Jews believing Jesus, including the international syndicated program Larry King Live. Biblically conservative, as well as contemporary and engaging, he is a sought-after speaker for major pulpits and conferences. He is the author of 4 books and numerous published articles. Please join me in welcoming David Brickner.
Thank you so much. Shalom. It is great to be back at DTS. I've been here numerous times, but always feel it one of the unique privileges of my life in any given year, because it gives me the opportunity to speak to the future leaders of God's people, the church, not just here in North America, but around the world. And so thank you for the invitation. I'm joined here with my colleague, Susan Perlman, who some of you already know, one of the founders of Jews for Jesus, and she is also the student services rep for the Board of Regents for Dallas Theological Seminary, and a longtime board member. So especially you ladies who are interested in leadership and ministry and missions, you want to make sure to catch her at the brown bag that is happening after this chapel. I also want to commend Chosen People and Mitch Glazer, who have put this event together and invited me to participate today. And they've invited me to speak about Christ in the Feast of Tabernacles. I guess, Mitch, you knew I wrote a book about it. So, published by Moody. You can also get a free copy of this book, and we have put note cards on the chairs for you if you're interested. We certainly would be happy to send that book to you, and hopefully what I'm going to share today will whet your appetite. But I just really want to emphasize the fact that this lectureship happening both here and over in Fort Worth at the sister seminary there is a wonderful indication of what I think is a growing means by which God is going to bring the gospel to the Middle East. And our partnership together, and Chosen People, and Jews for Jesus, and Israel College of the Bible, and Joel Rosenberg, and all of the people that you're having a chance to listen to today and in the coming days, demonstrate that God is doing something, that the Holy Spirit is bringing a greater unity. I think that makes God smile, and I think it should make all of us smile. So thank you, Mitch. Thank you to the staff of Chosen People Ministries. I want to show you a picture that was sent to me on Friday. And on the left, your left, is Dan Serad. Dan is a D-Min student here at Dallas. He takes classes in Israel, and he was also here this past summer. And he's the leader of the work of Jews for Jesus, our Israel director in the whole Tel Aviv area. On the far side, the right, is Seth Postel, and he is the dean, the academic dean at Israel College of the Bible. And you've probably heard, or you will hear from Erez Soref, who's here for this lectureship, who is part of, he's the president of that wonderful institution. And in the middle is a brand new couple, Israelis, believers in Jesus now, Shai and Tali. Shai was raised in an ultra-religious Jewish home, and he saw a video done by One for Israel, which you've heard of before as well. So we're all partnering together because Shai and Tali live near Petah Tikva. One for Israel asked Dan and Seth to follow up on that contact. They have just recently planted a Hebrew-speaking congregation there in the north, in northern suburbs of Tel Aviv. And so they followed up, and within a period of months, they professed faith in Jesus. And just this past Friday, Dan and Seth baptized Shai and Tali, and that's the Mediterranean Sea behind. Isn't that wonderful? So, so God is at work, and there is fruit as the gospel penetrates even the most religious communities in the Middle East. And I think this is an indication of the harvest that is yet to come, a harvest that is spoken about, that is alluded to certainly in this feast, the last feast. You will open your Bibles to Leviticus chapter 23, and you see there a promise of a harvest that is yet to come. And the Feast of Tabernacles is actually happening right now, and this today is the last day of the feast. And so it's appropriate for us to consider this festival and what the implications are. Now, for many of my Jewish people, the festivals are like this. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. But of course, God poured into the imagery and the symbolism and the textual aspects of these festivals tremendous insight into his character and his plan for salvation. And the last of all the 7 festivals mentioned here in Leviticus 23 is this Feast of Tabernacles. It is a harvest festival, and we can just read a few of the verses from here. Leviticus 23, first of all, verse 33. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's festival of tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days." And we skip down now to verse 39. So beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day also is a day of Sabbath rest. On the first day, you are to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. So your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So there are commands and symbols that really bring out in this text we just read the significance of this festival. And let me say, if you tend to your eyes gloss over when it gets to the book of Leviticus, don't worry, you're not alone. A lot of people who get excited about the Bible start with Genesis, Exodus, they get into Leviticus and then skip over. But there's so much richness here, and it's your heritage too. In fact, of all the 7 festivals that are mentioned in this chapter, this festival, the Feast of Tabernacles, is the only one that is enjoined upon all the nations, not just for Israel. And we see that in the millennium, this is the one feast that all the nations are encouraged to come up to Jerusalem. In Zechariah chapter 14, you can see that for yourself. But the first aspect of this feast is this command to remember. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. That's the word sukkot, or tabernacle as it's translated, or shelter. So your descendants will know that I had the Israelites living in temporary shelters, the sukkot, when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. God was concerned that once Israel, traversing through the 40 years in the wilderness, got into the land. When we were in the wilderness, we were very dependent upon the Lord. His guidance, pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, manna was how we ate water from the rock. We had that sense of dependency upon God. We might forget that. And so once a year, God said, 7 days you are to live in these temporary shelters, these tabernacles, to remember your dependence upon me. And we all need to be reminded that even though we might have money in the bank and a roof over our heads and food in the refrigerator, that our dependency is not on those things, but on God. God wanted Israel to remember that. Like that old spiritual, this world is not our home, we're just a passing through. We need to remember that we're not living just for the temporal, but for the eternal. And God intended for us as a people to remember that. A command to remember. And this is a picture of one very elaborate sukkah, or a tabernacle. See, it's even silk painted, and you can see the branches hanging through the roof. It's kind of an open roof, so you can see the sky at night, and there's pieces of fruit from the harvest that are hanging there to remind us that God provides for us, even when we don't have exactly a roof over our heads. Now, you can go to Israel and see these, a lot of Israel is suburban and urban. And so, people live in apartments, and there are often balconies, and you can see one of these sukkot on a balcony, and sometimes you've got a little satellite dish poking through the roof of it, So it's really interesting how we can add comfort to what God is asking us to remember, that we were in the wilderness, but we didn't have satellite TV there either. But it's really a wonderful time. You're supposed to invite guests to come in to the tabernacle to enjoy a meal together. So all of Israel really does celebrate this and enjoy this festival. It's almost like a week where a lot of people don't go to work. They take vacation. They go camping out in the woods or by the Sea of Galilee. It's a really important time in Israel. And we need also, like Israel, to remember that this world is not our home. We're just a passing through, and that all that we have belongs to the Lord. The second command we read was to rejoice. On the first day you are to take branches from luxuriant trees, palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Isn't it interesting that God has to tell his people to rejoice? We don't naturally do it, do we? Remember, Paul in Philippians said, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. The command of God is for his people to rejoice in him, because so often we see the problems around us. We have the difficulties. Whatever difficulty you carried into this chapel today may be the first and most important thing that's weighing on your mind, or a test that you have to take later on today. Whatever it might be, the command of God for all of us is to rejoice, both in the Old and the New Testament. And in this particular festival, there were unique things that the rabbis have kind of developed into what is called the lulav and the etrog. See, the etrog is kind of like a citron, and it's a fruit that is grown in Israel. Sometimes if you get a really good one, it's going to cost you significant number of shekels to get that. And then the lulav is the binding together of the palm and the willow and the myrtle. And these are things that kind of almost like playthings that you're supposed to use to rejoice. So you take these items into the sukkah and you shake them. You shake them up, you shake them down, you shake them this way and that. You do the hokey pokey. It's just a celebratory way that the rabbis have constructed the fulfillment of this command that we're reading about in Leviticus 23. And, that's one of the things that I have to say I am so grateful for in my Jewish heritage. A lot of people, kind of beat up on the Pharisees because they're the bad guys. But they have also been the interpreters of what God's commandments are. I mean, how do you rejoice with palm fronds and willow and myrtle? And so the rabbis have said, well, we'll figure it out. And so over time, there has been many traditions that have been developed in the Jewish community that have helped the Jewish people to keep and to observe these wonderful, important truths. And rejoicing and remembering are part of Leviticus, but over the time during the first and second temple period, the rabbis got even more creative. And they developed two additional ceremonies that are part of the pinnacle of this 7-day feast. And the seventh day is when these two ceremonies developed by the rabbis during especially the first and second temple period became part of the temple ritual. One was the water drawing ceremony. And this was, of course, because of the harvest connection, an opportunity for Israel to remember that it is God who brings the rains in their season and God who provides the crops. And so this elaborate ritual is described in the rabbinic writings in Sukkot, which is one of the tractates of the Talmud and the Mishnah. But we see this beautiful description in the Gospel of John. Jesus had such a unique way of seizing the moment. And of course, the most significant moment was in the upper room when he not only celebrated the Passover, the founding celebration of Israel's nationhood as God brought us with a mighty and outstretched arm out of Egypt, but he chose this moment of these rabbinic developments of the Feast of Tabernacles. We read in John chapter 7, verse 1, now on the last day, the great day of the feast, and that's today, Hoshana Rabbah, the seventh day, Jesus was in the temple. Of course he was. He's there with all of his people celebrating this wonderful conclusion to this holiday, Sukkot, the command to remember and rejoice. And rejoicing is really the central part of this. And so the priests would fill up giant cisterns of water and make their way up from the pool of Siloam. And there they would march around the altar in the temple 7 times up for the seventh day. And they would pour the water out over the altar. And then the Levites would be singing and dancing. From Isaiah chapter 12, they would sing, Ushaften mayim bisason mimayne hayeshua. With joy we draw water from the wells of salvation. And what a moment. What a high point in this great final feast. And Jesus, on the last day of the festival, stood and said in a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from them. Talk about a sermon illustration. Talk about driving home the point of who he really is. I have a friend in Israel named Asaf. I met him when I was leading the Chicago branch of Jews for Jesus. And we used to get together once a week to study the Scriptures. And we were going through the messianic prophecies. And the Lord had really opened his heart to the gospel. And yet he had not prayed with me to receive the Lord when his business called him back to Israel. And there, as he was continuing to read everything that I gave to him, he called me one day and he said, David, he said, I believe Jesus is the Messiah and I want you to baptize me. Well, I was going back to Israel the next month. They said, boy, that's great, Asaf. This is so cool. And so when I went to Israel, I sat him down and I said, okay, Asaf, you got to tell me, who do you think Jesus is? He said, well, he's the Messiah. I said, and? He said, he's the greatest person who ever lived. I said, and? He said, what do you mean, and? I said, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? He said, well, not really. I said, I tell you what, Asaf, I want you to read the Gospel of John. And everywhere it says something about Jesus or Jesus says something about himself, I want you to underline it. He got to this chapter, John chapter 7, and he called me and he said, I get it. I get it. And it was a privilege for me on my next trip to Israel to baptize Asaf in the Mediterranean Sea as well. But Jesus is claiming to be the living water. That's not just a human claim, is it? There's so much more that's embedded in these words, and we won't take the time today to dig into the Ezekiel. John goes on to describe it, and I do so in my book as well. So that's another plug for this book. But there's one more ceremony that's connected to this great celebration of the last day. It actually occurs in the nighttime. And there's another stained glass imagery of that water drawing ceremony. But this one is perhaps even more exciting and more celebratory than the water drawing, because it involves not just the priests and the Levites, but everybody. And in the middle of the temple, what happens is these giant candelabras tonight, would be set up, and the old robes from the Levites that were worn out would be used as wicks, and they would light these incredible giant candelabras in such a way that it would illumine the whole city of Jerusalem. There was said in the Talmud that it was almost like it was day in the city, even though it was night. And the other comments are, he who has never seen the illumination ceremony has never seen true joy. And so it became kind of like a circus atmosphere, according to the Talmud. They would actually have jugglers and play games and serve food. And this was the conclusion of this feast. And of course, we know that during this time, Jesus is in the temple as well. Now, in John, we have this interesting insertion of the story of the woman caught in adultery. And I believe that's scripture, but it may not be chronological. It may have happened on the last day, the great day of the feast, but just after that story, there is the story. I must have missed a slide there. Okay, so let's see if I can go back. There is, there we go. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. So again, he's seizing a moment during the Feast of Tabernacles, most likely, I believe, at the illumination ceremony. Another great sermon illustration that Jesus chose the moment to make a very specific remark about who he really is. And so this is for us, for all of us, to see that Jesus is in the Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, he's the fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles. And some people say, well, you know, all of this stuff isn't in the scriptures. Well, the water drawing ceremony and the illumination ceremony are not in the Old Testament. But folks, they're in the New Testament. And isn't it interesting, and you can scratch your head and think about this and maybe write a paper one day about it, how God was willing to use tradition, man's development of biblical themes, to point to Jesus. Now, we only need the scriptures, that's for sure. But isn't it interesting that Jesus was willing to take what the rabbis had developed during that time between Leviticus and the New Testament to point to himself as the fulfillment? And I just think that gives us a lot of ground for thinking and for reflection. But of course, as I said, being the last festival on the list of Leviticus 23, it's all pointing forward. There's a prophetic aspect to this Feast of Tabernacles, and we see I'm going backwards, here we go. We're going forward to the future harvest. The harvest is not, you know, when Jesus was walking through the fields in John, and he said to his disciples, look, lift your eyes and see, the fields are white unto harvest. He wasn't talking about grain, was he? He was talking about people. And there's a promise that those of us, especially who are working among the Jewish people today and thinking about Israel and the Middle East have, and that is that while a blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and thus what? All Israel will be saved. There is a future harvest that we're all looking forward to. We're sowing seed now for the harvest that's yet to come. I remember once I was handing out gospel tracts in New York City, right in front of Macy's department store. And a woman approached me, well-dressed woman in her late 60s, early 70s, and she was angry. And she began to yell at me and say, you should be ashamed of yourself. How can you do this? Do you know what you're doing? Does your mother know you're doing this? And then she spat out words that cut like a knife. She said, you're trying to complete the work that Hitler began. And she rolled up the sleeve of her dress to show me numbers on her arm. Ruth is a survivor of Auschwitz, the Holocaust. And I understood her anger, and there was little that I could say to her that day. So then you'll understand my surprise when several weeks later, during a Friday evening service at our Jews for Jesus office there in New York, while I was giving the message, who should come through the back door but Ruth? And I recognized her right away, but I couldn't quite place where we had met. So after the service, I approached her, and she reminded me where we had met. So I said, all right, Ruth, so what are you doing here? And she said, I have an open mind. And she did. And she kept coming back every Friday night, started coming to our Tuesday night Bible studies. And what a joy it was for me one Friday night to pray with Ruth to receive Jesus as her Messiah. Hallelujah. How can that happen? How is it that somebody who's so bitter and angry and closed to the gospel can open up to receive God's grace through faith in Jesus Christ? I'll tell you. Because that same power, the power that raised up Jesus from the grave, is active and at work in the world today. And I want you to be encouraged that God is at work today among the Jewish people in ways that we haven't seen since perhaps those first Jews for Jesus, Peter, James, and John, were out preaching the gospel. And this to me is a sign of great hope and encouragement in a world that is full of turmoil, that God has promises. He's made them. They're precious, and He will keep every single one of them. And that's the future harvest. I was back on the streets a couple of years after this incident with Ruth, and I was teaching a young college student about how to hand out gospel tracts. And as he was doing it and I was observing, he was approached by a religious Jew, probably a rabbi, you know, with the black hat and the black coat and everything. And he came up to him and he began to berate this college student. How can you do this? You should be ashamed of yourself. And right at that point, I mean, I couldn't have figured it out, but God did. Right at that point, up walks Ruth. You remember Ruth? She goes up to this Orthodox Jew and she says, young man, not too long ago, I was right where you are. But now I know Jesus is my Messiah, and I'm more Jewish than ever. And I watched this guy scratch his head and walk away, and I thought, praise God. There's another seed sown for the harvest that's yet to come. Amen? And that's God's work that we are invited to participate in. And it's going to happen. The sooner the better, don't you think? I mean, my heart cries out Maranatha. I hope yours does as well. Even though I see a lack of interest in future things kind of in the church today, I believe that the darker the night, the more our hope of glory will become part of our discipleship and our faithfulness to God. But I would say that the Feast of Tabernacles is also not just for this earth, but for the new heavens and the new earth. There is a promise in the book of Revelation, Revelation 21, and even into 22. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. And if you go on to read from there, when God tabernacles with us, the new heavens and the new earth, the description that John uses of that new city and that new abode for God's people draws heavily on the language and the imagery of the Feast of Tabernacles. It is that future hope and that future image. There's a river, there's water flowing, and there are fruit trees that grow on either side of the river, bringing new fruit every single month. And the saints are gathered around the throne, dressed as they might have on a celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, singing praise and honor and glory to the Lord. And what an amazing picture that is, don't you think? An image, if you will, of what God is going to do. The earthly becomes even bigger and greater and more real. Like C.S. Lewis's image in The Last Battle. Further up and further in, everything is bigger and more beautiful and more lovely, and yet it's still, in some wonderful way, a reflection of all that God has given that's good here and now. And that should also make our heart long to appreciate the good things that He's given us here and yet to remember this world is not our home. We're just a passing through. Amen? Amen. I want to invite you to stand. I want to bless you all with a blessing that comes from the book of Numbers, chapter 6, and it is called the Aaronic benediction. I remember once a lady coming up to me after a church meeting and saying, I really love that erotic benediction. Aaronic benediction. Numbers chapter 6. God gave this blessing to the priests, the sons of Aaron. He said, bless my people with this blessing, and they will be blessed. First in Hebrew, and then in English. Would you bow your heads, please? Yivarechecha Adonai vayishmarecha. Yoher Adonai panav alecha v'yikuneka. Yisau Adonai panav alecha v'yosem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. Bashem Yeshua Mishichenu Sar HaShalom. In the name of Jesus, our Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Amen. God bless you.